Thank you. Now we'll move to our 1 o'clock timed item. This is Agriculture, Parks, and Natural Resources. This is a regional forest update. And who is presenting is Mr. Hunsinger and Gary Trimmer.
Yeah, good afternoon, Board of Supervisors. Josh Hunsinger, the Director of Agriculture, Parks, and Natural Resources. Happy to bring this item forward today as an update on the progress we're making with the Forest Health Program. Carrie, unfortunately, is a little bit under the weather today, so rather than expose you all to what she's going through, she's going to be presenting online today, okay. So she very much regrets not being here in person, but I'll turn it over to Carrie.
Okay, thank you. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you very much, and I really appreciate your accommodation. This is a bug that I think is best not shared.
Oh, thank you.
Certainly. Excuse me, Carrie Timmer, your Regional Forest Health Coordinator, here to give an update on the Regional Forest Health Program's activities over the past year and a preview of some of next year's anticipated work. Next slide, please. So more specifically today, we'll be reviewing various regional forest health projects from this past year, providing a quick update also on the Parks and Open Space Division's fire-safe activities on county-owned properties, diving into a little bit more detail on the Vibrant Planet Land Tender Project, which will actually be the main focus really of the presentation today. Vibrant Planet is the maker of the Land Tender tool, which is an interactive mapping and planning tool that we're using to create a 10-year action plan for forest health activities throughout the county. And I'm hoping, because I can't see, but I'm desperately hoping that Joe Flannery, who's the Director of Customer Success for Vibrant Planet, is there in the chambers with you, and he will be walking us through actually a video that will show you the work that we've been able to conduct on that project so far. Next slide, please. Thank you. So a brief background for anybody who might be new to the issue. Your board, of course, has indicated that regional forest health is a top priority for a number of reasons, not least of which is that much of the county has been rated by CAL FIRE as high or very high fire hazard. Along with that, Placer has the most habitable structures in these high hazard wildland-urban interface areas, or WUI zones, than any other county in California. A dubious honor, a bit. And then we also do, Placer County also does have critical infrastructure and many other resources that both people within the county and beyond rely on, including things like water and energy, recreation, interstate travel, and so much more. So we need all the tools in the toolbox in order to protect people's lives, property, resources, and our critical infrastructure. Next slide, please. Your board has also provided guidance for us over time regarding your particular priorities around evaluating every acre of fire-prone land in the county and implementing landscape-level forest treatment projects to reduce that wildfire risk. Also, increasing the use of biomass utilization as a means of disposing of the excess forest and residential green waste material that comes off of these projects as a means of reducing fuel loads and fire risk. Also, advocating on legislative and regulatory issues that affect our ability to do this important work. And then finally, aligning with partners and strategies to support cross-jurisdictional projects that can benefit the county. Next slide, please. So we just want to start with a few illustrations of work that the Regional Forest Health and Parks and Open Space Divisions have been doing in response to this guidance from your board. So I'm going to start out by highlighting 7 projects that we've been working on. And then with Joe's help, we'll dive in a little bit deeper into the 8th project, which is the Land Tender Project. So the first one, of course, is French Meadows, which I know you guys are very familiar with, but just wanted to give you a brief update on where we are as we reach as we near the end of our work season. So this year we've been able to conduct treatments on 826 acres. And actually, depending on how the weather goes the rest of this week, we may be able to break that 1,000 acre mark, which would make me very happy. We will have spent close to $1 million on hand thinning, mastication, and work in preparation for prescribed burning. That's just for this season. And then cumulatively speaking, we have about 7,200 acres total of planned treatments. We've completed about 4,300 acres to date, meaning we're roughly 60% complete for the entire project. Funding-wise, we've secured $17 million in funding and so far have spent $10.6 million plus the roughly $1 million that we anticipate receiving in invoices for the work to be completed this season. Unfortunately, as we've talked about before, this project has faced a number of ongoing challenges which continue to keep us busy. We've had a fairly small pool of vendors servicing this project, and for this season and the past probably 2 seasons really, they've been devoting more of their time and resources to the time-sensitive salvage efforts coming off of the major mega fires that we've had recently, including the Caldor, the Dixie, and of course last year's mosquito fire. And so they've been devoting their expertise and their equipment to dealing with the salvage and fire rather than fire mitigation projects like French Meadows. So that has definitely affected their ability to conduct work on our project. We also this season had a very late start because of the severe winter last year. So that meant that some of our vendors were starting their work on lower elevation projects and then couldn't move their crews and equipment as quickly as or as early as they might have been able to weather-wise. So that's another issue that we're dealing with. The closure of Mosquito Ridge Road resulting from the mosquito fire and then the severe winter, that's our major ingress and egress route to the project. And so having to go way around through the El Dorado National Forest in order to get to French Meadows Reservoir added a great deal of travel time and then, obviously reduced then the amount of work time in any given day. So that factored into our vendors' decisions about whether or not they could send crews out. And then finally, lack of certain types of trained workers. And interestingly, the hardest hit seems to be the truck drivers, the haulers that haul the logs and the biomass material in and out. So there's just not enough of those drivers who are trained to deal with the conditions in the backcountry. And so that also has hampered the ability to get as much work done as we would have liked. But we are doing things to address these challenges. So as it relates to the vendor situation, we have a current procurement active on the street right now for the remaining 2 seasons worth of work for French Meadows. And we did a great deal of outreach to generate more interest and engagement. And so we have 24 vendors who registered as part of this bid process. And of those, 14 showed up for an in-person bid walk out on the project so they could get a better sense of what they were bidding on. So we're cautiously optimistic that for these next 2 seasons, we'll have, first of all, more bidders to choose from in terms of awarding contracts, and then secondly, just more people available to help us get the work done. And as it relates to Mosquito Ridge Road, we've been in close contact with the Forest Service, of course, pretty much on a weekly basis, really. And it appears that work for the permanent fix on Mosquito Ridge Road is starting today. And so we're hoping that, again, weather permitting, that work can be completed and that the road will be open and available to us at the start of the next season, which will make a big difference. We ended up in our procurement having to ask our vendors to give us basically 2 different bids, one if they're coming in by Mosquito Ridge and one if they're coming in through the El Dorado. And in terms of what we're doing next on French Meadows, we're going to continue working with our prescribed burn partners, which is primarily the Nature Conservancy and the Forest Service, to help them prepare areas for future prescribed burning. We don't manage the burning ourselves, but we do some of the groundwork that prepares for that activity. We'll be executing contracts this winter coming out of our procurement that we just talked about to be sure that all the remaining work is contracted out, and that gives the contractors the ability to plan more effectively for the movement of their equipment and personnel. So we think that will help ensure that we have more vendors working on our project next season. And then as it relates to the training, we've recently connected with Sierra College and the Golden Sierra Workforce Board, both of whom have expressed interest in helping us explore ways to address the forestry workforce needs, whether it's through additional training programs or augmenting existing programs. So we're looking forward to having those further conversations. So that's the wrap up on French Meadows. If you could advance, please, to the next slide. Thank you. Our second big project is mosquito fire restoration. So we've been working with the Tahoe National Forest to prepare for restoration and reforestation activities on some of the federal lands that were burned by last year's mosquito fire. And I just want to point out, this one's a really interesting project because it illustrates the benefit of the counties having a master stewardship agreement with the U.S. Forest Service, in this case, the Tahoe, because it in certain cases, it allows us, the county, to be able to move more quickly. And of course, salvage operations on fire that has already burned is really important to the county too, because much of the work is removing dead trees, burned trees, for public safety purposes. So it is a project that is important to the county, and we were able to help facilitate and expedite the movement of that project forward. So that's another of the benefits of the Master Stewardship Agreement, which I think we initially had primarily to support the French Meadows project, but now we're starting to see that there are other benefits too as additional project needs come up, and the county is situated such that we can help the Forest Service move things along more quickly. Excuse me. Next slide, please. Okay, great. Then another project that we've been working on up on the Forest Hill Divide has gone by various names. It started out being called Baker Ranch, and then it's Short Tail Canyon, and now internally we kind of refer to it as the Forest Hill Community Protection Project. But all of that to say, we're working to create a new coalition of local, state, and federal partners who can plan for a series of fuel breaks and other activities to protect communities on the divide that were not affected by mosquito fire, and of course, protection against future fires. We do have a federal earmark for this project in the current federal budget, thanks to our Senator Alex Padilla. Budget negotiations are ongoing, as you, I'm sure, are aware, and it's not a done deal, so to speak, but we're feeling pretty comfortable and confident that we will receive that funding to help us get this project off the ground. We are also working with the Sierra Nevada Conservancy on potential capacity building support from them to help also get this kind of new collaborative project off the ground. They're very interested, the Conservancy is very interested in supporting these larger landscape, larger coalitions to do this kind of work at a grander scale. And so they're looking around throughout the region to identify places where there's capacity existing that can be leveraged into the creation of these larger collaborative groups, and they're interested in talking with us about that. So that's pretty exciting. Excuse me, if that's the case, we might look at expanding this Forest Hill Divide effort to take on a larger landscape across the entire American River watershed. So that would kind of put us on par with a similar project in the North Yuba watershed, which has been chosen by the Forest Service as a priority landscape, and therefore attracts literally tens and hundreds of millions of dollars of federal funding because they have achieved that particular designation. So ultimately, that's what we're working toward, is developing something of that same nature here in Placer County, so that we can start attracting some of that same level of funding in the future. Next slide, please. We're also working on a fuel reduction project with many other partners. We're really a sort of a side partner to this one, but it's an important project along Interstate 80 that OES, our own Office of Emergency Services, is leading with many other partners, including Caltrans, the state, CAL FIRE, local fire safe councils in that area, Placer RCD, and others to reduce fuel along a 30-mile stretch of Interstate 80. And the goal there is to protect communities and infrastructure from fires that can be started by, truck brakes catching fire, or unfortunately accidents that can occur on those stretches of Interstate 80. And of course, fire can easily then skip off into the forested areas along the edge of the freeway, and then get into our communities and important assets and resources. So that's another rather important project, because I meant to count before this presentation how many of these truck brake fires there have been. And I know there have been multiples so far this year, but we hear about them every year. Next slide, please. Another area of project work for us is helping to support advocacy tours, typically of the French Meadows area. We work with our partners to organize these field tours to bring out decision makers and their staff at the local, state, and federal levels to showcase the benefits and, frankly, sometimes the challenges of doing this wildfire resilience and forest health work in the field. And it's been pretty successful, I think, in terms of generating interest from our elected officials and prompting them to help us increase financial and policy support for this important work at all of the different decision-making levels. Next slide, please. The sixth project is the California Forest Residual Aggregation and Market Enhancement, or CalFrame project. And simply put, this is Placer County is working with the Placer County Water Agency on a study funded by the Office of Planning and Research at the state to look at opportunities for better connecting projects that generate biomass material, like French Meadows as an example, or any of these other fuel reduction projects that we've been talking about, to connect the material from those projects to facilities or other entities that can make use of it for feedstock to create energy or various other value-added products. Next slide, please. For this one, I wanted to give a shout out to my colleagues in the Parks and Open Space Division. As you know, they've recently come under the umbrella of the Ag Department, and we're discovering as we get to know each other that there's a lot of synergies and opportunities for us to work together. So they've identified over 400 county-owned properties and evaluated all of those for defensible space and other kind of treatment needs. And starting in fiscal year 21-22, they identified about 140 parcels, close to 800 acres in need of treatment. So this is, the county kind of putting its money where its mouth is when we're asking other people to do defensible space around their properties. We need to be sure we're doing the same on our own. So over the last 2 years, Parks and Open Space has treated nearly 200 acres, and they've also been able to purchase some equipment to help with ongoing maintenance. In addition to the funding that was authorized for this project by your board, Parks and Open Space received an award from the California Tahoe Conservancy in the amount of $658,000 and change to do treatment on 71 acres specifically in the Tahoe Basin. So Parks is currently working on the first 17 of those acres and hopes to complete those before the winter weather sets in, and then they'll work on the rest in subsequent seasons. Parks is also in the process of securing vendors to work on a 50-acre fuel load reduction project at Hidden Falls. And this would be to reestablish and expand fire breaks that were created originally when the park opened. And then Parks has also completed 4 other fuel reduction projects totaling about 50 acres. And that included removal of dead trees in the Lake Tahoe area, work on Los Lagos Parkway, Old Dutch Flat Cemetery, and Dry Creek Corridor. Also, an interesting tool that Parks and Open Space uses that I'd like to explore for the forestry world is grazing. So that's a big part of their land and vegetation management and fuel reduction strategy. So they had sheep and goat grazing contracts this year, totaling about $231,000 and covering just shy of 580 acres throughout the county. So that's at a cost of about $400 an acre, which is far less than the mechanical version of that kind of treatment. So that's something that I look forward to looking into. And then finally, we've identified, just like last week, practically, a project that we're going to work on together, Forest Health and Parks and Open Space, along with our environmental engineering folks, to develop a fuels treatment project on 144 acres of the county-owned property surrounding Cabin Creek and the Eastern Regional Landfill. And this will be a great complement to work that's being done by the Forest Service to treat the Forest Service land that surrounds the project. So that's like the outer ring, and then we would be able to, if we can pull this project off, we'd be able to arrange for treating the county-owned portion outside of the buildings and infrastructure. So that's an exciting new project that we're undertaking. Okay, next slide, please. All right, this brings us to Land Tender. So this is, I think, our biggest project this year, which is the development of this interactive mapping and decision support tool to help the county, first of all, identify critical assets that need protection. Secondly, evaluate those assets related to the wildfire risk that could affect them. And then third, use that information to create a 10-year action plan and sort of project pipeline of projects that we can do to minimize or reduce the fire risk to those critical assets. So we have a video that we're going to share in just a minute that will illustrate our progress to date and sort of explain a little bit more about how this land tender tool actually works. But before we get into that, I just wanted to address a couple of questions that have come up as we've been talking about this process. Questions related to how the use of land tender, at the sort of county-wide level might affect the priorities of individual property owner groups or other organizations. So I just want to say that the intent of the land tender process is not to take the place of localized planning and project identification. There's already great work being done by private landowners and other groups, our fire safe councils, our Firewise communities, CAL FIRE, the RCDs, and so many more. They're doing great work to protect homes and communities. The land tender process is a little bit different. So in addition to these localized plans, the county needs an overall county-wide plan that addresses broader county goals and priorities. And in this case, also that would include the larger landscape forest health work, much of which we do in partnership with federal partners. So we need this countywide plan in order to be eligible for certain state and federal grants for large landscape work. Meaning that we're planning for projects in the hundreds of thousands of acres range as opposed to hundreds or thousands, which is, kind of where some of these more community-focused efforts land. So county staff is still here to help work with and support any of these individual fire safe councils or other organizations in achieving their specific goals. And in fact, we can use the land tender tool at those smaller geographic scales to work with these individual organizations and help them to develop their own planning and prioritizing for their communities and their particular footprint. So they're two separate processes that work together, but achieve slightly different goals. Okay, one more slide, please, before we go to the video. Sorry if that was confusing. There should be a list. Back one for, yes, perfect. Thank you very much. So what we want to do now is pick up where we left off at our update in March and share some preliminary analysis from the use of the land tender tool. We've only had our full county data, Placer County data, available for just a couple of weeks, but we have been able, with Joe's help, to pull together a sample of how this process works using our specified data. So the county's been working with a coordinating committee that we call the Wildfire and Forest Resilience Committee, or WFRC for short. And this is an internal group that's made up of county departments and close partners that engage in wildfire and forest health issues. I just wanted to bring this up and show you the list of participants because you're going to hear a lot about this WFRC committee. They're going to be referred to quite a bit in the video that we're going to show in just a second. They have been kind of serving as a steering committee, guiding the implementation of land tender for the county, and they're going to be continuing to work with us to oversee the deployment and the results. And so you'll see on the slide that this is, a pretty wide-ranging, multidisciplinary team, including leadership from various entities and departments here at the county, such as CAL FIRE, the Placer Fire Department, Placer Fire Marshal, Office of Emergency Services. We've had representatives from the CEO's office in both Auburn and North Lake Tahoe, and then Air Pollution Control, Placer County Water Agency, Placer, and Placer RCD. So this is our kind of team of experts who've been helping us out with the project. So, okay, so we're going to show a video now that Joe Flannery from Vibrant Planet made. He's going to walk us through what's happened since our last update, share some of the initial analysis conducted by this WFRC group, and set the stage for how this initial assessment can be used with stakeholders and other partners to gain consensus going forward on what the priority areas are to work in the county. After the video, we'll circle back. I've got just two more quick slides to wrap up the overall presentation, and then we can open it up for comments and questions. So I think we should get to the video.
All right.
If you would.
What?
They don't have it. No.
What?
Does Carrie have it? Could she share her screen?
Hey, Carrie,
Yes.
there was no link provided for the video. Is there a way that we could share a screen share, or is there someone that has it that we could?
Yes, just in case this happened, we had Patty Armenteros ready to go. I gave her the bridge. I don't know if you need to make her a presenter or not, but she would have it on her screen and be able to share.
She's in the queue.
Perfect. We just requested her to promote. So just
Awesome.
1 second.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No worries. I'm glad we were able to make it work.
Always have a backup with technology.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Patty. Okay, let me share my screen so we can get presenting. One moment, please. Yeah, let me move the movie over. Okay. Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, we can't hear him.
Joe, we can't hear you.
I'm so sorry. One moment.
Might have to navigate it yourself, huh?
Okay, what about now?
No?
Hold on. If we could. Let's take a quick pause. Apparently, Josh, your staff just sent it over to the guys in the back, so they're going to see if they can load it through our system. So give them just a moment.
Megan, would it make sense for me to go through the final two programmatic slides while we're lining this up, and then we can just wrap up with land tender altogether?
Whatever you would like to do, Carrie.
Fine.
Okay. Okay, and we don't really need slides for this, so I can just walk you through what we have as the next steps for the overall regional forest health program next year, which includes, I realize I should have my camera on here, continuing to manage implementation of French Meadows and the other exciting projects that we discussed a moment ago, supporting our legislative affairs staff to advocate on issues affecting our work. Those are usually either policy things that affect us. For example, the recent passage of the prevailing wage law that is going to now apply prevailing wage to many of the kinds of jobs that we have here in the woods to do this fuel reduction work. So we're going to be working with our advocates and our partners to try to figure out what that means for us and to get clear on the definitions and how much that will affect our work going forward. Continuing to explore opportunities to expand biomass utilization. We're doing quite a bit of work in that area right now, growing out of that CalFrame project that we mentioned, plus other actual efforts to site facilities like our own environmental engineering team that's working on the Cabin Creek project up at the Eastern Regional Landfill. And then, of course, finishing up the development and approval and then implementation of this 10-year action plan and building out that project pipeline so that we can start working in coalition with partners to seek the necessary funding and get some of these projects off the ground. And then finally, I just wanted to point out that our own Andy Fecco, General Manager of Placer County Water Agency, he was appointed to a Forest Service Wildland Fire Mitigation and Management Commission. The commission's goal was to identify and recommend actions to help increase the pace and scale of forest treatment work across the U.S. I mean, this is the whole country. And according to Andy, well, first of all, the report from that commission's efforts just came out at the end of September. It's a massive report. It's like 320 pages or something. But Andy was clear that out of the 148 recommendations in that commission report, the biggest takeaway for him, at least, is this need to work in partnership to increase the pace and scale of all of this kind of work. And that's really what we see the Regional Forest Health Program, and particularly our 10-year action plan. That's what we feel that's designed to do, is to help Placer County, excuse me, identify and start building these partnerships and coalitions and collaborative efforts to do all, as we mentioned earlier, all the tools in the toolbox for home hardening, for neighborhood and community defensible space, for reducing excess fuels across our forested landscapes. If we do all those things together, we can build community resilience and reduce the severity and impact of wildfires on our lives, property, and the resources in Placer County. So that's where we end up. And now if we can, if it's appropriate to backtrack to the tool that's helping us to achieve that end, I will stop talking.
We just need a couple minutes. They're still embedding the video. It just takes a second.
We've got a couple minutes, Carrie, but thank you for your presentation. Looks like you've been doing a lot of work, and we appreciate it, making some kind of good progress. Supervisor Gustafson.
Is it okay if we ask some questions while we're
You
spending
betcha.
time? Okay. Thank you, Chair. Carrie, I know we're going to see the presentation on land tender, but I wanted to ask whether we have coordinated with PG&E and Liberty Utilities on their undergrounding projects, so that the high threat areas may not be as high threat. If the utilities in a certain area are undergrounded, we might focus our energy on another area where they haven't undergrounded, or vice versa. So I was just wondering if that's part of land tenders mapping, to look at those utility projects.
That's a great question. I may kick it in more detail to Joe. PG&E has been using land tender as well, and so they have been, making their data available through land tender to Vibrant Planet. I don't know if that data though contains the undergrounding, but that's a great heads up that we should be asking about that.
And their projects are on pause, I think, while they're waiting for the utility, the PUC to approve their rate increases, but both Liberty utilities in the Tahoe, Truckee area, as well as that. The other thing I've been asked a lot about from the smaller communities, and maybe I'll go to a question you can answer right now, which is on the I-80 corridor. I had a request from some folks from Emigrant Gap up to Cisco Grove, and I'm wondering if we could get the map of what Caltrans is going to work on along that highway stretch, because there are, well, Dutch Flat, Alta is where we've seen the most truck fires. We have seen incidents further up the hill, and I'm just not sure the extent of where those boundaries go for that Caltrans work. So I don't know if you have that map or if there's others, or if Dave has information on that, because it's a great project. We've finally got Caltrans to the table, and my staff have been going to all kinds of meetings, pushing them to get their highway done. But as I get to drive it every day, I see how thick it is on both sides.
Indeed, Cindy, members of the board. So the project, at least that's on the table right now, is more the Alta, the Dutch Flat. You think about where the Dutch fire was, right in the middle of the mosquito fire, things like that. Essentially, the way that the committee has been trying to approach this is in pieces and phases. So phase one was this piece, high priority on the west side of the freeway, knowing that Caltrans is doing a project on the east side of the freeway. And so one of the recommendations that came out of the committee was to kind of, keep that out of the mix while Caltrans does that. But understanding that really that work needs to be done from Auburn, all the way to the state line. And of course, just as Carrie has mentioned, there's a lot of those coordination issues. State and the federal have to get together. The county's in great position with U.S. Forest Service because we had that stewardship agreement with Tahoe. Caltrans, as I understand it, doesn't necessarily have those same type of agreements. CAL FIRE is in that mix too, trying to help everybody kind of work through that. So definitely kind of on our radar for that whole stretch, like I said, from here really all the way to the state line. But this, at least the initial project that Carrie mentioned, is really kind of that Alta Dutch Flat on the west side as
So
that first
continued-
phase.
So continued advocacy on our part to push it throughout.
100%,
Placer
right?
County.
And you know, I-80, of course, is the, you know, obviously the 800-pound gorilla in the room, but there are so many other Caltrans roads in our county in that we need to be looking at, and of course, as well as more of our own.
Well, and that's where hopefully we understand where the threats are and we focus on those areas first. So
Right.
that group I just met with last week and they had asked about that, so.
Yep,
Thank you.
absolutely on our radar. And I guess I would just say, and not to steal Carrie's thunder, but, you know, there will be some public input opportunities as part of this, and we would strongly encourage folks as they're, you know, one, come and participate, please, and whether it's in the land tender or in the community wildfire protection plan work that we have coming up very soon, all of those, we really want the community's input on those things to make sure that they stay on the radar and stay, you know, high on the list.
Thank you. I may have other questions, but I think you're probably ready for land tender now.
Okay, well, let's roll it.
Hi, I'm Joe Flannery, Vibrant Planet's Director of Customer Success, and your guide inside the land tender platform. We actually have two updates to provide today in regards to land tender and Placer County. The first update is that land tender is now available across the majority of the forested portions of Placer County. We're inside land tender now, looking at the Placer County custom version, delineated by the yellow boundary. It's actually too big for one screen, but I can scroll across and see that from Auburn State Recreation Area all the way to the shores of Lake Tahoe, land tender is now readily available to assess the landscape, mitigate risk, and prioritize projects. The second update is that the WFRC group has already been busy in land tender with a preliminary assessment of the county and some preliminary prioritization of potential projects. They're in a position to begin stakeholder outreach and consensus building at this time. As a review, the WFRC has divided the county into 3 zones based on the National Weather Service fire weather zones. Those different zones are from east to west, the Tahoe zone, the Summit zone, and the Foothill zone. Let's look at one of these zones in detail and explain how the WFRC is weighting trade-offs to prioritize projects right now. We are now inside of the Foothill zone. We see Auburn State Recreation Area and Interstate 80 running through the northern portion of this zone. As a reminder, we can assess trade-offs of limited resources to projects by using our objective sliders on the left-hand side. Again, a reminder from our last video, we see that the categories of sliders match the categories of strategic areas, resources, and assets. Now, I've already weighed the objectives within the WUI area, and the WFRC group has chosen to prioritize trade-offs and weigh trade-offs of resource allocation within WUI areas, and then weigh them differently outside of WUI areas. For the sake of time, I've already expressed the WFRC's weight objectives within the WUI areas, but I'll walk you through how the WFRC weighted objectives outside in the remaining portion of the zone. As a group, the WFRC has assigned trade-offs and resource allocations of assets in this zone to a 4, safety to a 5, recreation to a 4, biodiversity to a 3, ecological commodity to a 3, carbon to a 3, water to a 4, and science and culture to a 3. 2 things of note. The first is we just saw a lot of color changing on the screen. If you recall, what has just happened is land tender is now expressing the areas that have the highest restorative return on investment. Essentially, they're the best bang for our buck of where we can mitigate the loss in the order of magnitude described by the weighted objectives on the left-hand side. We know that there are limited resources to treat every square inch within Placer County, and planners have a difficult decision to make of where to weigh trade-offs. This is why we've built a slider objectives on the left-hand side. When the WFRC group has weighted safety all the way to a 5, the maximum, they're essentially saying that they want to allocate resources to safety to the fullest extent, but maybe one extent less when it comes to recreation. It's not that they care about recreation less, it's just the WFRC group knows that there are limited resources available to treat and mitigate risk, and they've expressed these trade-offs accordingly by weighing their objectives. We also know that these areas in blue are far too great for us to treat all at once. And if I scroll down, I see there's over 120,000 acres. That might not be feasible to treat at this time. For a preliminary assessment, the WFRC group has chosen to look at 2,000 acre projects over the course of 10 years. I think this is actually a pretty good goal here. Remember, there are 2 other zones in Placer County, and if we treat 2,000 acres in each zone, that's about 6,000 acres a year over 10 years. I'm now gonna hit create scenario. Right now, land tender is optimizing all of the weighed trade-offs along with the project constraints to give us our initial projects within this area. As a reminder, I can click on some of these projects. I can actually scroll down. I can see the distribution of likely treatments that are going to mitigate the risk to the things we care about. I can see the costs, and I can see the land ownership distribution. A quick note on the patterning of projects within this area. If I turn on my fire hazard model, I can see that a lot of my projects are aligned in the areas with the higher fire hazard. I see some projects down here around Todd Valley with high fire hazard. I also see some projects down along the Auburn State Recreation area. One thing that I like to see is I turned on my safety zone, and here we can see a critical evacuation route running right through all of these 3 projects. And as we know, we weighted safety very high. It's no mistake that there's a critical evacuation route for the communities of Todd Valley that runs right through prioritized projects. That wasn't the only factor. As we saw, the WFRC group decided to weigh objectives in a whole slew of different options. Let's actually go through the other zones and take a quick glance at how the projects with the same constraints of 2,000 acres over 10 years with a project a year looks across the rest of the county. Here we see the Summit Zone. We see projects near the crest where there's high recreational values. And we also see projects aligning around the Interstate 80 corridor and some of our WUI areas as well. Let's take a look at the Tahoe Zone, utilizing a slightly different set of weighted objectives because the WFRC had the choice to weigh objectives and assess trade-offs differently for each zone. And the Tahoe Zone, the Summit Zone, and the Foothill Zone all had custom assessments of trade-offs. One thing of note within the Tahoe Zone is I do see a lot of projects aligning around ski areas. Now this is no mistake, as in this zone, the WFRC group chose to weight the recreation objective very high. They're assessing the trade-off of recreation in this area and allocating resources towards protecting those precious assets. As a longtime recreationalist myself in Placer County, I understand that many of the recreational assets within Placer County are clustered unevenly within this Tahoe Zone. And ski areas in particular have a lot of overlap of existing recreational opportunities. Thus, we do see projects around the ski areas. What's neat about Land Tender is it gives us the opportunity to quickly iterate and experiment and reassess. For example, let's say I want to take a look at where the projects may lie if I were to exclude the ski areas from prioritization. It only takes a moment, and this is what it looks like. I've actually built distinct management areas that exclude the ski areas, and now we see a lot more projects clustered around Martis Camp, Lahontan, and the northern portion of Highway 89 within the Tahoe zone. Again, I'm not suggesting we ignore the ski areas. As a skier myself, I think the skiing opportunity would be improved along with the reduction of risk to our recreation infrastructure by doing so. I just want to demonstrate here that Land Tender affords us the opportunity to look beyond their initial prioritization at a second tier of prioritizations, if you will. Let's go back to the main Tahoe area that we looked at in the beginning, where the ski areas are included for assessment. As I mentioned earlier, the WFRC has simply conducted here a preliminary assessment and a preliminary project prioritization. This really sets the stage for multiple further iterations engaging stakeholders and collaborators. Let's look at a quick example now. Let's say, hypothetically, a group in this zone were to only weigh safety and assets, ignoring this assessment of trade-offs to all other strategic areas, resources, and assets. In a assets and safety only scenario, we see the projects really clustered around the airport, Martis Camp, Highway 89, and just south of Donner State Memorial Park. In the future, we can actually start to engage stakeholders by using our Create Comparison screen. Let's compare the initial WFRC scenario with this assets and safety scenario. I'll hit Compare. And as I scroll down, we can start to see areas of non-consensus and complete consensus. We're now looking at the same comparison screen on a slightly larger view. I'm going to start by turning off the areas of non-consensus and focusing only on these areas of green, complete consensus. These areas in dark green are showing prioritized projects that satisfy the needs of both of the aforementioned scenarios. The first, of course, a WFRC scenario that assessed trade-offs to a whole host of strategic areas, resources, and assets, overlaid with the hypothetical stakeholder scenario that only allocated resources to the protection of safety and assets. As we can see, Land Tender affords us the opportunity to build consensus and to iterate with stakeholders and community members very quickly. When taken at scale across all three zones, the WFRC scenarios can form a beginning, a foundation, or a starting place to engage stakeholders and community members as we all work together to prioritize projects to reduce the risk across Placer County.
Great, so, excuse me. I just wanted to quickly outline what our next steps are anticipated for Land Tender, and would then love to open up to questions, and if it's appropriate to have Joe at a microphone, if there's anything specific to the Land Tender tool, he would be the person to be answering those questions for us. So quickly, our next steps are, pretty much what Joe was suggesting. We have a sort of a baseline scenario that was created by the WFRC group that represents, most of, if not all of, really the county's primary fire and forestry related partners through our various departments. So what we are planning on doing then is to further the conversation by hosting town hall meetings in each of the three zones that were described in the video, the Tahoe zone, the Summit zone, and the Foothill zone. And the purpose of those town hall meetings will be to allow the public to better understand how this tool works, the public and of course any organizations that are interested in operating in that area. And then through a survey tool, once we're able to explain how it works and how the weighting of the different objectives can change the focus areas on the map, we'll be asking participants to fill out a quick survey that we can then merge and come up with sort of public scenarios, if you will, by zone, based on the input from those town hall meetings and the survey responses. And then, as Joe described in the video, we can start overlaying these different scenarios that were developed by different people with different sets of priorities, but then we start highlighting those areas of consensus. And that's not to say that we wouldn't do work outside of those areas, but in terms of having a countywide plan that we can put forward to our federal partners and federal and state funding agencies, to have done that level of analysis, to be able to show those areas of complete consensus, regardless of the stakeholder group who was inputting their priority, is a really, really powerful tool. And again, we would love to do everything. We would love to treat all 120,000 acres and then beyond, but we need to stage the effort and stage the work and raise the money to do those projects kind of in some sort of sequence. And the tool also allows us to be opportunistic. If there's a particular funding source looking to fund activities of a certain type or in a certain geographic location, we have our analysis already completed and can just pull a project out of that region or that kind of activity and have it ready to go as a grant application, and we can work with our individual partners within the county to do the same thing. So it seems like a really powerful tool that gives us a lot of decision support to justify what we choose to do. So once we are able to hold these town hall meetings, to meet with fire safe councils and some of our key partners individually, and create these different scenarios that we can layer and then get our consensus focus areas, then we will be bringing that plan back to your board for review and approval, and then that will launch our organized efforts, to our collaborative efforts to get those projects off the ground. So with that, I'm wondering if there's any questions that we can answer or thoughts that you might have or direction that you would like us to be aware of as we go forward into this next sort of more public phase.
Thank you, Carrie. Supervisor Gustafson has another question, comment?
Thank you. Thanks, Carrie. And remind me, are we the first county to do this on a countywide basis in the state?
I believe that's true using this tool. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I think we all need to be proud of the investments we've made to try to protect our communities by doing this. I had a technical question first. How do you define assets? What's in that category?
Assets are essentially our built environment that is not related to safety. Safety would be communication
Safety,
infrastructure,
yeah.
critical evacuation routes.
So homes,
Hospitals, schools. In fact, Placer County has several versions of what a structure is. So a structure will respond to fire, very similar, right? However, the societal value of that structure could be valued differently.
Right.
So Placer County has critical infrastructure, there's hospitals, there's primary structures, et cetera. Roads, water utility infrastructure in particular. And in fact, to answer your question from earlier as well, the example I showed with the ski areas, how I turn them on, turn them back off, and we had two different priorities. We could easily do the same thing with PG&E utilities and Liberty utilities. We can have one version where they'd be above ground. What are the priority projects in that area? Another version, we can exclude them for a hypothetical situation in which they're undergrounded, and we could sequence and prioritize.
There's still a
from there.
danger, I don't deny
100%.
that, but the risk goes down once the utilities are underground.
Absolutely.
I think
So-
if we look at our catastrophic.
Exactly,
areas.
exactly. Did I answer your question about
Yep.
the assets?
Yeah, and I think, while I love our outdoor recreation, I think if you ask any homeowner paying insurance right now, protecting their homes and assets is more important than even the industries that supply us with skiing. So, I think that's, where my focus is, although certainly I appreciate the skiing as well. So in your weighting system, at least in the foothills area, you equalized recreation to assets. And so that is why I asked what's in assets, because to me, that would be a higher priority than the recreation. You put safety as 5, you put assets as 4, and you put recreation as 4, and I might, but again, I'm sure that you all had a great opportunity to talk about that and weigh it appropriately. I think our constituents would say recreation isn't as important as our homes.
Yeah, and one point of clarification, so wasn't enough time in the video, it was already long enough as it was. There was 2 zones for prioritization within that foothill zone.
Okay.
A WUI zone, where all of the primary homeowners are, and I'd already weighed those.
Okay,
So I was expressing quickly the WFRC's weighted
Okay.
objectives outside of communities.
outside of the.
So there's probably a
Okay.
few structures out there, that's why assets was, the WFRC group probably chose assets as a 4. I'll tell you, inside of the WUI area, it was much higher than recreation.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, great. I just wanted to hear that.
Great.
Thank you.
Right.
And then, I think my only other comment is, and I just happened to be listening to NPR early this morning, and they were interviewing somebody, and I forgot her position, but she was basically saying, 5 to 6 years is what we get out of a project, and then we've got to retreat because the risk starts going up again. So when we look at a 10-year horizon, but within 5 or 6 years, we've got to retreat the existing areas, we need to accelerate the pace and scale and I know this tool will help us get there and make that argument. And then a question or a comment, and then a question. On the FireWise communities, many of the FireWise communities in my districts have organized HOAs. They have a staff, a newsletter, an ability to get people engaged in a conversation. It's the more rural areas that don't have an HOA driving it that are still risky and have need, and that's where I think the county's leadership steps up with the maps, and through the town halls, we need to engage those folks because they may be living in a higher risk area, but they don't have an HOA with a newsletter and a way to contact all their neighbors easily to get them to a meeting to start working on a project. And I've heard that repeatedly from various members. It's like, how do I get involved? How do I get my neighbors involved? Will you help me get my neighbors involved? They want to do the work, but they don't have that HOA to kind of facilitate those discussions. So they rely on the county's leadership to do that. And so then my final question is, how can we use this to get some of the CAL FIRE new grant money? And I assume that's our intent, is to put a really good, compelling case together to get more funding for Placer County projects. So Carrie, I think that one's for you.
Yeah, sure. That's one of the things we've been talking about with this Cabin Creek project coming together, because there's just a lot of synergies around it, and we were able to look at a sort of a preliminary run of land tender through both our efforts, but also the Truckee Fire Protection District, which has a portion of Placer County in it, and they're using land tender as well. And the Cabin Creek area came up as a high priority on their assessment as well. So it's a way to, we're sort of taking advantage of this before it's fully rolled out, and which is one of the reasons why that project kind of floated to the surface, because it has a lot of engagement, very interested set of partners. There's the synergy with the Forest Service work that's happening right around it. There's some key uniquenesses, if that's a word, to that facility. It's the only one of its kind in the area, so if it were to be lost, the replacement impact is huge, and that is one of those factors that contributes to the weighting in those different objectives. And also there are fires that start simply from the vehicles going in and out of that facility, and it could very easily funnel a fire start down into residential areas and other ingress egress routes and other important assets. So because of the timeline of the CAL FIRE grants that are due in January, this is one that we feel like we can probably put together. And there's some county support as well, which is also always very appealing to a funder to know that the applicant is putting some real resources besides just in-kind contributions to a project. So we're feeling pretty good about that one. We've had 2 conversations and we're continuing to meet to prepare an application for that grant proposal.
Great, thank you. That was it, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
Supervisor Gore.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you very much for the update and then for the presentation. Appreciate that, and it's great to see how much work has been done since we approved it, right? It's just really terrific, and the fact that you might be able to utilize this to get some grant funding next year is terrific. Couple things. Carrie, you had mentioned grazing, which, right, great idea. Our local jurisdictions do that right now, and so there's an opportunity to do grazing in some of our, like creek beds, Dry Creek area, other areas, that's an excellent resource. And then I shared with you, but now that I see CAL FIRE and OES in the room, there's a company in the city of Roseville. I met with them a couple of weeks ago, and they are a data analytics company. And they were doing a presentation before the Roseville City Council, I think maybe last week. They sent me their presentation, but they have a product that senses wildfire. So they have sensors throughout a community, and then it can determine when a wildfire happens. And I thought, well, that makes sense. You could do that in a city without a problem, but what about more rural areas? And they said, oh, we do that too. And I went, that's interesting. I shared with Carrie the slide deck, and she thought it might be a neat opportunity to just have CAL FIRE OES in your working group, perhaps get a presentation from this business just to see if there's a possibility to engage with a product like that where they have sensors and you could actually determine where hot spots are. So I will, maybe I'll share that with both of the 2 of you as well, and then if it makes sense, I'll leave it in your hands.
Thank you. Any other comments from board members? I see none. We need to get your name for the record. We know who you are, but for just
Right now?
yeah, right.
Joe Flannery.
And you're with?
I'm with Vibrant Planet.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Okay. I see no more questions or comments from board members. Is there anyone in the public wish to address the board on this?
Hello again, Wayne Nader. I just had a couple of comments that I wanted to make. I appreciate Cindy bringing up about fire-wise communities. They're really critical. And one that I'd like to highlight is Winchester in Meta Vista. I believe it's been recognized nationally for its effectiveness. Anybody who's been in there a few years back and has been in recently can see the dramatic difference that's gone on there. And I think it's a good model for the rest of our communities in Placer County and their high-risk areas to really look at what has been accomplished there. One of the wonderful things is it's done without tax dollars. The community makes that investment, each one in their own property, taking those things and getting them done. And so I just wanted to highlight that. I'm glad that Cindy brought that up. The other thing I wanted to ask about is when we remove this material from the forest, the high-risk areas that needs to be removed, we obviously need something to do with it. And I know Cabin Creek was mentioned a couple of times, and I'd be interested to find out what the status is. This has been going on for years, and I'm hopeful that it's closer to actually happening now. We have Rio Bravo, which I hope is still operating. As far as I know, I think it is down in Rockland, because they're obviously taking some of this material right now. A lot of biomass plants in California have shut down, but I think Rio Bravo got a special dispensation to continue because they were getting rid of this high-risk material. So I'd like to know what's happening with Cabin Creek. I think it's an important project that's been long delayed for getting rid of this material. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? No one online? No. Do we have an answer about Cabin Creek? I don't know anybody here from from, what's it? DPW. Yeah, I don't see anybody here, but we can get that information. All right,
Yeah, I can offer just a brief high-level update, and, excuse me. Environmental engineering is working on seeking funding for construction. Your board has approved various documentation that allows the project to move forward. I'm not 100% certain where it is on securing all of its necessary permits, but I do know that Jared Deck, as the project manager, has, I want to say that he's been able to secure, I want to say $6 million, definitely 4, but I think it might be 6, toward the construction. So it is definitely a going concern. It is considered a live project, so to speak, in terms of trying to get the funding in order to construct the project.
okay, good, thank you. All righty, anything else from the board members? All righty, with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.